All right, guys, welcome back to Falcon Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined by my co-host, Scott Karasik. And today we are finally talking about Falcons training camp. The offseason is over. The season is almost here. Well, games haven't been played yet. But we'll talk about the first week of training camp. As usual, we'll talk about some of the roster moves that have been made a little bit ahead of training camp. And as often is the case, we will answer your mailbag questions throughout the show and towards the end of the show. So, Scott, as we often do on this show, we talk about any roster moves that have been made since we last did a show. Unlike previous shows, the turnaround wasn't quite as long, but we did get a bevy of moves in sort of the traditional, I guess you would call them, camp bodies, a bunch of undrafted guys that the Falcons sort of scooped up to sort of fill out their 90-man roster. Those include the offensive tackle from Duquesne, Larson Graham, Braylon Cherry, the undrafted free agent from NC State, the wide receiver, and they re-signed Reginald Davis III. This one's from Texas Tech, not the Georgia guy. So now we have two Reggie Davises at wide receiver on the team. And unfortunately for Reginald Davis, he did not make too many fans. I think he's rocking number 84 in practices. So that's not going to.
Cherry's wearing 88.
Okay, yeah. So, they're probably not long for this world in terms of, those number choices. So I don't think it's going to hurt people too much. And even if they do make the team, I'm like 100% certain that those will not be the numbers that they choose to carry into the season. Making room for those guys, they cut Taylor Reynolds, the cornerback from James Madison, who a lot of people sort of were high on going into training camp, including myself. Cam Keezer was another guy. The center from Portland State was another guy that sort of potentially could be in the mix to sort of make waves given how much youth the Falcons have at that position. He was considered one of the better undrafted free agents along that offensive line. Any of these moves sort of stand out to you, Scott?
I mean, I get why they would have done the Larson Graham versus Cam Keezer move, just because Graham is a tackle and, there actually is a need for more tackle depth. And Keezer's like one of 6 centers or guys who can play center on the roster. So he was kind of useless in terms of depth if they felt that he wasn't the right guy. I liked him. I thought he was the kind of guy they'd want, but it is what it is. Braylon Cherry, Reginald Davis III. Yeah, I think those guys are inconsequential. I don't think either one of them is going to make the roster. As far as Taylor Reynolds, I didn't think he was that good in the first place. He made a lot of picks, but you saw him get burnt a lot too. So I was never really a huge fan of his. So when he got cut, it was whatever to me.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, the good thing about Dan Quinn's regime, which wasn't always the case with sort of Mike Smith's regime, even though I don't think it was as people like to portray it. But generally speaking, these are the types of moves that teams would make ahead of training camp, and they'll basically be camp bodies. These guys are going to get a legitimate opportunity here in Atlanta if they're capable of it. So. I wouldn't necessarily rule them out, but I'm with you on that. The odds are certainly stacked against them. I think the thing that might help Cherry or Davis, if they get some opportunities to return, then they can sort of make their way. I mean, it's sort of a similar situation to J.D. McKissick, who, didn't really do as I recall, wasn't necessarily lighting the world on fire in terms of his offensive performance, but it really was sort of his special teams ability that sort of got his foot in the door. So I think that opportunity is potentially there for guys like Cherry or Davis who did do returns in college. Reynolds was a guy I liked. I thought he sort of had some potential as a slot corner and maybe a little bit more of a fit there in terms of our man-heavy scheme, just because he has a little bit more length and a little bit more size than Brian Poole does at that position. Obviously, I wasn't expecting him to sort of win that job or anything like this year, but just as like a developmental guy that they could probably stash on the practice squad for a year or two, similar to what we've seen with guys like Deji Olatoye or CJ Goodwin, guys that you can sort of carry on for a couple of years and see what you can get out of them a few years down the road. So I liked him for that. Cam Keyser was a guy that I did think had a decent shot at sort of surprising a couple people. I thought everybody's focused on the offensive tackle group in camp, but I do think there's an opportunity for guys like Keyser or Travis Averill or one of these interior guys to sort of impress as well. So it's unfortunate, that he won't get that opportunity, but we'll see what Graham can do and whatnot. I imagine that Larson Graham, they did play Youngstown State last year. From the highlights of that game, that Duquesne Youngstown State game, Derek Rivers did seem to give him a lot of problems in that game, but I imagine if I watched that game in full, maybe he did a decent job against Rivers that probably impressed the Falcons scouting department and prompted them to bring him aboard maybe. I don't know. All right, let's get into the training camp storylines for week 1. Now, this first one to me is the only, there's really the only one that matters to me, but I'm sure there's other topics that people want to talk about in terms of what's going on. But it was good to hear that Takk McKinley got the green light to participate in 11-on-11 drills today. And, presumably will continue to do so for the remainder of training camp. So, whether that qualifies him being as 100%, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but he's healthy enough that he's going to be able to practice fully, presumably moving forward. So he's back. So we get to see Takk. We don't have to wait 2-3 weeks going into training camp. The whole prognostication of him not being able to go until the third preseason game that you heard from Thomas Dimitroff pre-camp, maybe we'll get to see him in that first preseason game in a week or so. So that to me is the big news so far from the first 5 days of practice from training camp. How do you feel about this, Scott?
I have to agree. I'm glad to see McKinley's already ready to go. I wonder if they're going to play him in the first preseason game even. I'd love to see him get the time in now. Get as much time in on the field. He's already playing, it looks like 100% of the snaps that he can play that he would have normally gotten in training camp anyway. So I want it to be I want Takk to be in there right away. I want him to get into that rotation right away. And I think having him in there to come in on third and fourth downs and, long plays and let him learn the Leo while Brooks Reed is still playing it. I think that's what you got to do. And after this year, Takk should be the primary Leo.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see if he's going to get this early opportunity. Like, I wasn't as high on Takk having a great rookie year as other people were, just because I thought he would be a little bit more limited going into training camp than what we've seen so far. And so I think this, sets the bar probably a notch higher. Obviously, I'm not going to go too crazy with it until we actually get to see him play on the field against other NFL players before, going too crazy with the predictions and the prognostications and the hype and whatnot. But it's nice to see him getting some of these opportunities a little bit earlier than expected. Probably, I was basically thinking, okay, he might not practice for the first 2 weeks or something like that. And to see him on the field this early, I think is a very promising sign for his development. And because he does need it. He needs a lot of coaching. He needs a lot of refinement. And, the good thing is, he's going to play hard. He's going to play with, he's going to play 100 miles per hour. And that's not going to change. And he'll still be able to contribute doing that. But the more development he can get today, the better he'll be long term. So it's definitely a big positive step for him. And so far, all that people have been talking about in camp, this to me is really the only thing that really matters for me, at least so far. We did get a mailbag question from Evan Birchfield about this. He asked, Takk good for him to start the season?
I'm not a doctor, but I think if a guy is playing on day, 5, and he was already, basically doing the standard, I guess, what would you call it? The standard, 45 reps as it was on day one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if he's playing 80% of the reps that he would normally play on day one, and then he comes on day 5 and he's playing 100%, I think we're safe to say he's going to play what he was supposed to be playing from the get-go.
Yeah, I think it's a fair statement. So, I mean, Evan, if you're asking when you say start, like play week 1, yeah, I think he's definitely on track for that. If you're saying whether he'll actually start week 1 and get those first team Leo reps, I think I won't rule it out, because obviously, the earlier he gets on the field, the more chance he has to sort of unseat Brooks Reed, who presumably is going to be in the top spot there. But I would just wait until we actually see him on the field before I start worrying too much about whether or not he's going to be starting week 1. But regardless, I think he'll certainly be in the mix, in the rotation mix, if he's healthy, assuming that he can maintain his health between now and that Bears game. We'll see him on the field, I think, definitely week 1. So, yeah, it's just a question of how much. And again, that's something that we'll only be able to know and start to determine once we actually see him getting reps in games and deeper into camp and whatnot. All right. Now, another storyline that's been creating a ton of buzz in the last, 48 hours or something, is all of this stuff about Jalen Collins. And Jalen Collins, he's in danger of losing his grip on a roster spot. He's on the bubble. He's gonna get traded. He's gonna get cut. He's gonna get benched. He's gonna get all this type of stuff. So, this is one of those things where I'm just sitting here it's way too early in trade. Maybe Jalen Collins is on the bubble. Maybe he's not. But going off of who's getting second or third team reps on the third or fourth or fifth day of practice, to me, is just, you're not going to find that stuff out. There's a whole month of football that has yet to be played that is going to determine those things. The coaching staff are not even anywhere close to determining what their depth chart is going to be right now. You heard the quotes from Von McClure earlier today from Jalen Collins, from Dan Quinn. They basically said that, the main reason why he's not working with the second team is that other guys want to get opportunities. So I think this is people making a big deal about nothing. I think it's because there's not a whole lot else that's really dramatic going on in Falcons training camp. We don't have a whole lot of drama going on, so people got to make something into being much, much bigger than what it is. We'll find out about Jalen Collins. We've been down this road every year. Oh no, Jalen Collins, his rookie season, he played like crap in the preseason. Oh no, Jalen Collins, he's never gonna get an opportunity. He's a bust. What all is that? He gets inactivated for 2 games last year after the suspension. Oh no, Jalen Collins. And it's just people just for some reason love to freak out about Jalen Collins. And he's shown time and time again that once you just give him some time and you're patient with him, when he gets on the field, he'll make plays. So I think this is people freaking out for no reason. Scott, how do you feel about it?
I feel like it's a non-issue. I feel like the Falcons look at it as, we have 300 snaps his rookie year, and we have, what was it hit last year? Probably 600, 700 snaps?
Something like that.
We got about 1,000 snaps that we can look at Jalen Collins on real game film.
1 season's worth of snaps, basically.
Yeah, we got a whole season's worth of snaps on Collins. We know what Collins is at this point, for the most part, and where he can work and where he can refine. When you look at C.J. Goodwin and Deji Olatoye, they have maybe 150, 200 snaps max on each guy. They have 3 games worth on each guy. So I think it's more they just want to see what those 2 guys have. They know what Collins is. They know where he can fix. And they're not going to move Trufant or Alford. Those guys are set starters. So they're just going to play Collins where they're going to play him in that 3rd rep because they know what he is. They don't need practice reps to evaluate what he is. He's probably got a safe spot on the roster. I would put his chances at making the roster, if you had to ask me tomorrow, at 100%. Or sorry, 99%. The 1% would be if he got injured. The only way he doesn't make the roster. He gets injured, he's got to go on injured reserve. Other than that, I think he's going to be on the active game day roster every single week as the third cornerback, maybe the fourth cornerback if they really like what Kazee's bringing as a nickel. But I think he is a true fit for that third corner because they play him outside. They'll put him on the biggest dude on the other team and just man him up and let Trufant or Alford play in the slot.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Scott. I mean, for me, it's like a 99% chance of him making the team. I'll leave a sliver of a chance that he doesn't. But it's one of those things where like those decisions aren't anywhere close to being made. Like that's the point I keep trying to stress to people. Like nothing has happened so far at training camp. Like that's like this is a process. You know, the first roster decision, because they got rid of the 75-man cut down this year, the Falcons don't have to make any roster decisions until September 2nd, I think, is when they have to get down there to 53 guys. And so, you know, between then, you know, that's like, 31, 32 days from now. And that's going to be, you know, how many practices are going to have between now and then? Like 25 at least? How many preseason games are they going to have? At least definitely 4. So it's one of those things like those decisions about who's the third corner, who's the third safety, who's the starting right guard, who's the fourth tight end. All those decisions won't be made until all of that stuff gets played out. And so people freaking out because Jalen Collins is getting 13 reps on the third or fourth or fifth day of practice need to just chill out. Now, if Jalen Collins is getting third or 14 reps going into the final preseason game, then that's something that you can start to freak out about. But that's like, what, August 29th or something like that? We're 4 weeks away from that day. And so I stress to people, be patient. I know. It's like you got to get your hot takes in now. We got to overreact to everything. We haven't learned as a fan base, you don't ever overreact to Jalen Collins news because he's proven 3 years in a row now or 2 years in a row now that when your initial opinion of him is going to change, just give it enough time. The other thing we do every single year is we get freaked out about the Falcons get thrashed in some preseason game. We freak out about it like, oh no, Matt Ryan threw a pick to the Dolphins and he's going to be terrible again. And guess what? He was the MVP last year. You know, the Falcons lose to the season opener against the Bucs. Look, I'll admit I freaked out too. I was like, oh, see, I told you we were going to go 7-9 when we lost to the Bucs, and then we went to the Super Bowl. So it's one of those things where people just need to be a little bit patient, pump the brakes, and just calm down, let football happen. You know, we got another month of time before we can start freaking out. Now, let's wait till at least August 20th before we start freaking out about whether this guy's in the doghouse or whatnot. So that's what my advice would be to everybody, but I know that's going to fall on deaf ears.
There's nothing else I can really say other than I think they're just trying to see what they have in the other guys. It's the 5th day of training camp. That's what I would do if I was the head coach. I know what I have in Jalen Collins. I know what he is. I know what Trufant and Alford are, but I have to play them with the ones. So I'm going to give the most reps to the guys that I'm not sure. That's Olatoye and Goodwin.
Yeah.
Like, Poole's playing with the 3s as well. That's not being made a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, you know, people see depth chart stuff on August 1st. And they think it means it's going to be the case on September 1st, and it's not.
Until Jalen Collins is being replaced by Jarner Jones or Bleedy Ray Wilson or even Akeem King, they want to see what they have because they drafted him.
Yeah.
But until he's being replaced by like Bleedy Ray Wilson or Jarner Jones or Quincy Mosier, sorry. You know, unless he's getting replaced by one of those guys, don't worry. He's probably on the roster. I'd put money that he's going to be on the roster.
You know. All right. Enough ranting about Jalen Collins and the overreactions. Let's talk about Demonte Kazee. And maybe it's a slight overreaction in that case. But he did get some first-team reps the other day because Ricardo Allen was excused from practice. I'm curious, Scott, do you feel like getting some of these early opportunities is going to help him carve out a bigger role with the team as a rookie this year?
Uh, I think it'll let him have that bigger opportunity. I don't think that bigger opportunity is going to be at safety unless the Falcons are running big nickel sets. Where the idea is, let's put Neal in the slot. Let's have Kazee and Allen back there running cover two. Things like that I could see them doing just to be like, hey, let's have the best coverage we can and have Neal covering a tight end. Outside of that, I'm not seeing it happen at free safety. Now, at nickel corner, as just a true nickel corner, I think he could be out there quite a bit. Maybe even more than Jalen Collins is out there because he plays well in the slot. He's got great instincts. He's quick. He's like a very poor man's Tyrann Mathieu. Now, Matthew's a freak. He's a great safety. He's instant playmaker, all that. I do think Kazee has a lot of the same kind of instincts. I don't think he's the same kind of athlete.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my stance on Demonte Kazee is basically my stance on Jalen Collins. We'll see. Like, I'm excited for him to get opportunities early in camp, but until we actually get into some games, we'll see. Like, that's going to be my case pretty much for everybody this early in the process. Is there's a lot of football left to be played this summer before we get into sort of who's going to have this role and who's going to have that role. And I'm looking forward to see what Kazee looks like on the field because I do have a lot of high hopes for his potential, particularly a couple of years from now once he gets a little bit more comfortable playing that safety position. And so I'm definitely eager to see how he looks, if he looks like a natural there, or maybe it's a little bit of a square peg once we see him on the field in a couple of days going up against Miami and whatnot. But until then, it's a wait and see approach with me pretty much for every player across the board. So I hope he does well, but right now, who knows? All right. Now, on a little bit more of a downer, Devin Fuller tore his ACL and will be on the IR for the second year in a row. As many of you know, Devin Fuller missed all of last season because he suffered a shoulder injury pretty late. I think maybe like in the third preseason game, maybe the fourth preseason game. I can't remember exactly, but it was pretty late in the process. And so his rookie season was washed because of that shoulder injury. And now his second season, where he was really sort of in the mix to sort of prove himself, is now going to be washed because he's coming back from an ACL injury. And that's a little bit more of a problem for a wide receiver like him. Knee injuries with how much running and how much speed he has. Scott, what do you think about this in terms of his future in Atlanta?
I think they should sign a injury severance and just let him go.
Yeah,
I mean, I know that sounds awful, but like at this point, either he's cursed here or it's just not the right fit. Like, it's not worth it. Like, he seems cursed, so just let him go.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is harsh to say. I'm not exactly optimistic about his future here. I'd like to see him get one more opportunity, a third strike, as it were, a third swipe at the plate. But we'll see what happens with him. But yeah, it seems doubtful, particularly if the Falcons, a lot of his ability to make the team's roster was tied to his ability to win that return job, as opposed to sort of not necessarily being in the mix, at least at the upper part of the depth chart at wide receiver. He certainly could have made the team as like the sixth guy, but the sixth guy isn't really going to be active on Sundays unless he's returning kicks. So it's going to be tough for him to come back, especially if the Falcons are able to find someone who's adequate in that role. And that brings me to the question we got from Evan Birchfield. He asked, with Fuller done, is the return job all but locked up by Roberts, or do you expect anyone to compete with him in the preseason?
I think there's going to be a lot of people competing with him. I think you'll see Reggie Davis. I think you'll see Taylor Gabriel. I think you'll see, just going off the top of my head, Teron Ward. Just depends on whether you're talking kick or punt return on as to who the returner is, but I think you'll see those guys. You might even see Kazee back there. Just trying to think, like, see if I'm missing anybody. Oh, Justin Hardy. I think you'll see a bunch of dudes compete. Hardy and Nick Williams back there too. There's a bunch of dudes that you'll see back there competing for that job. You might even see BJ Daniels get a shot.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And again, this is very similar to what I said about Collins and Kazee. Like, I think, if I was putting money down, I'd probably say Roberts probably opens the season at least as either the punt returner or the kick returner. Probably I would imagine the punt returner. But I don't think it's a lock, because I think this is another position that the Falcons are going to have a competition. Like last year, we looked at it. At this point last year, we were all like, "Oh yeah, Devin Fuller is going to be the return guy," and we came and found out that J.D. McKissic gave him a real run for his money, and so it's one of those things where like this is going to be determined on the field. I think the Falcons are going to give multiple guys opportunities because it's going to help a lot of guys sort of make their name. Like Andre Roberts is, I wouldn't say he's a lock to make the roster, but he doesn't have to be the punt returner or the kick returner in order to make the team. But other guys do need to be the punt returner or the kick returner in order to make the team, including some of those undrafted receivers that we talked about earlier in the show. So I think we're going to see a lot of competition there. I don't think Roberts is a lock. He's probably a safe bet. I like to hear that Taylor Gabriel got some reps there. I think he's probably the best returner on the team. I would like to see him get that opportunity when the season starts. But if that's not the case, then, I think that, as Scott alluded to, there's plenty of guys on this team that could sort of handle those duties. If not, Coleman, Hardy, Daniels, like half the undrafted guys. You could even put Robert Alford back there if you really wanted to. I think C.J. Goodwin could probably do it, even though I don't know if he has a lot of experience doing it, but he seems athletic enough and fast enough to do it. So I think the Falcons have some options there that they can explore. All right, Scott, we got another question from Evan Birchfield, and I'm curious if there were any other guys that sort of stood out for you, but he asked, considering training camp has just started, have there been anybody that's caught your eye?
I haven't been at training camp. I've heard good things about what Takk's been doing, but, I mean, I haven't been there, so I wouldn't know, just being honest.
Yeah, I mean, for both of us, we're not at camp every day, so we're basically gleaning things from Twitter and videos that are posted, and it's hard, you can't really glean too much from an 11-second clip of somebody going up against one-on-ones or someone knocking a pass away. So it's nice to see Duke Riley getting some opportunities. It's good to see that he's in the mix there, that he's sort of – it sounds like he's hit the ground running coming into camp. Other than that, C.J. Goodwin, even though it seems to be all about Jalen Collins, if C.J. Goodwin is currently earning the number 4 job, I think that's a promising thing for him. If Deji Olatoye is ahead of him, that's a promising thing for him. If Akeem King is also playing well, that's a promising thing for those guys as well. So that's nice to hear. Dan Quinn gave a shout out to Reggie Davis. He's another guy that could be in the return mix. That's the one from Georgia, not the one we just signed. It's going to be very confusing trying to distinguish between those two all summer long. But so those are the guys that you heard early on. Casey's another one of those guys. So if those guys are performing up to par, it's nice to hear those things. But again, we'll see what happens once these guys hit the field, once we get a little bit deeper into training camp and seeing who's sort of still standing out and whatnot. All right, we got a couple more training camp specific questions before we get to the rest of the mailbag. Next one comes from Jason at your boy J94. He asks, are there any undrafted free agents worth keeping an eye on this preseason?
Ooh. I mean, there's a lot.
All of them?
Yeah, I'm sitting here is there just one guy that I want to sit? No, I'm just going through the roster. I want to see what Reggie Davis can do. I want to see what I want to see what, Napi and Freeman and Brunskill do in the scheme. I want to see how Mosier and Moore do. I want to see how, like, pretty much all these guys. Like, I don't give a shit about Torgerson because he's like the third string quarterback. If he somehow makes the roster, wow. But like Larson Graham, I want to see how he does because he's a big dude, but he also moves quick. Marquise Lucas, same thing. Big dude that moves quick. Even though he's not really like a undrafted guy, I'd love to see how Jermaine Grace plays in the scheme. I'd love to see how all those different centers are going to play. I'd love to see how Tanella Tuopu or whatever, Tupou plays. JT Jones, I'd love to see how he does in the scheme. Chris Odom, I wasn't a huge fan of his, but I'd love to see how he plays. There's a ton of guys. I'm just like, let's see how they play. I want to see how Averill plays. I want to see how Edison plays. Yeah, I know Edison was on a roster, but to me, he's a UDFA.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm the same way. Like, I don't know if it's because I did more research this year, because usually I think we sign undrafted guys and I'm like, yeah, whatever. But like this to me is at least the most intriguing undrafted class that I've seen from the Falcons in a very, very long time. Like I'm very curious about pretty much all these guys. So once we get to the preseason, I'm definitely, I know most people check out, but I'm definitely going to be paying a lot of attention to these guys in the third and fourth quarter and seeing who stands out and whatnot. And there's always a couple of guys that stand out that, even a guy like Torgerson, he can wind up, throwing 2 touchdowns in that first preseason game against Miami Scrubs. And all of a sudden we're going to be talking about him being like, oh, can he actually, make a push for that third quarterback spot? Will he play well enough where the Falcons are going to be forced to keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster? Does that push somebody else out of a roster spot? So, I mean, any number of outcomes could potentially happen. So I'm very curious to see how things unfold. So, if you're one particular guy, I mean, like, to me, the most intriguing matchup is the offensive tackle position, because I think that's, if you're looking for somebody who's going to make the team, I think your best bet is one of those offensive tackles sort of winning a job. But in terms of picking one of them, I don't know. Like, I know people like Kanapi. I like Brunskill. I think Will Freeman's going to be in the mix. I think Graham's going to be in the mix. I think Lucas is going to be in the mix. So it's one of those things where, like, any one of those guys you can put money on possibly winning that third. Even Kevin Graff, put money on any one of those guys or somebody else. I have no idea. So, if you're going to pay attention to anything in the preseason, pay attention to that offensive tackle position in the second half and see if those guys can sort of, unlike most Falcon offensive linemen, handle the Miami pass rush. So we'll see what happens. Evan Birchfield, on a similar note, asks if it may be early, but our first preseason game is 10 days away. Are there any matchups you look forward to seeing in regards to depth players?
Nope. I don't even pay attention to who the depth players for the other team are. All I want to see is what the Falcons are going to do with their own guys.
I do want to see Sue play. I want to see our right guards go up against Sue. I want to see how that goes. Other than that, I'm looking at Miami's depth chart. Like like their backup wide receivers aren't exactly amazing. I don't know. Maybe see if our linebackers can cover Thomas Duarte or something. I don't know. Other than, I don't really care about specific matchups with the Dolphins and whatnot. And, maybe one of our wide receivers can burn Cordea Tankersley or something like that. But specific matchups, no. It's, as Scott said, I'm more paying attention to the Falcons guys as opposed to the Dolphins guys. But I'm sure 1 or 2 Dolphins players will pop out and be like, oh, that guy, if that guy gets cut, maybe we should think about putting him on the practice squad. So we'll find out. All right, moving on to the rest of the mailbag. We got a question from John at Leovani Lasada on Twitter. He asked, do you think there can be a short in this offensive circuit for the Falcons?
Oh, I mean, I'm trying to see the only spot that's really really a bad spot, I guess, would be right guard. I'm not worried about fullback because I know if Renew beats Derek Coleman out, that means he really earned the job and he's better than Coleman. And Coleman's already a solid fullback. Like, Coleman's not great, but he's also a fullback, but he's a solid enough fullback to where you're not like, oh, this guy sucks and we're screwed. I mean, I can't really think of a short. As long as the pass protection stays there, like, and as long as the line stays healthy, as long as Matt Ryan stays healthy, as long as they're healthy, I can't think of anything.
Yeah, I'm you know, to me, it's really about health. I know we don't like to talk about injuries. We like to pretend that they don't exist, but I think injuries are really the only thing that's going to really be a significant derailment to the Falcons offense. I think even if right guard is a problem area, I think you can compensate somewhat for that. You just sort of slide your protections to the right instead of what teams mostly do and slide them to the left. Now, maybe that, makes Andy Levitre a little bit less of a less effective as a starter because he's not getting as much help from Alex Mack as he normally would. But I think Levitre's played long enough that, even if he, he'll have a couple of bad games, but it's not as if it's going to break the Falcons offense or anything like that. I think, what will be more of a problem for the Falcons is not necessarily the right guard position being an issue. It's if they have to deal with a long-term injury for one of their other four starters. Like, as a play caller, you can compensate for one bad offensive lineman to the most part. Like, you just give them a lot more help. You do a lot more 6- and 7-man protections and whatnot. But if you now have injuries at other spots, particularly at offensive tackle position, like say in an instance now you got Ryan Schrader out for a couple of games, and then the person who's backing him up is some untested, Kevin Graff or Andreas Kanapi guy, and he's going to be going up against, Clay Matthews this week. That's going to be a little bit more of an issue, especially if Schweitzer or Garland, the other guy playing beside them, is playing problems, and that's going to be a little bit harder for the Falcons to compensate. Fortunately for them, they got skill position players that they can adjust their offense to sort of deal with some of those issues. But then if you have injuries at those spots, that will then throw a wrench into that. So injuries is really the only thing that you need to be worried about too much. The fullback position, I'm not worried about it. Like if the fullback is good, great. If the fullback is terrible, guess what? You don't need it. Many teams have proven over the years that you don't need a fullback to run a functional NFL offense. So, that's an adjustment to the Falcons. Most of the issues the Falcons should be able to make adjustments to. Injuries, depleting too many injuries spread across the offensive roster are a little bit more of a problematic issue, and you won't be able to deal with those as easily, especially considering, you can argue that the Falcons' depth on offense outside of wide receiver and running back is not as strong as it is on defense. So I think injuries would be a little bit more problematic with their offense than it would be with their defense.
I'll agree there.
Falcons Andy asks, do you think there are any fringe roster players that have trade value?
Ooh. No, I don't. Not unless you're getting a fringe roster player back from somebody. That's really all I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, this time of year, you're talking about a player-for-player trade. Like Kansas City and Seattle just pulled off a trade where they basically traded they swapped backup linebackers that play special teams, Kevin Pierre-Louis and DJ Alexander. Yeah, Scott's right. Like if there's probably some fringe guys that you're talking like a Teron Ward, maybe you're probably not trading him for a conditional 7th. You're probably trading him for like, I don't know, a backup linebacker or something like that. So it would be a player for player swap. And then generally speaking, like I would probably say if it's a player for player swap, you're talking about guys like maybe Josh Perkins, DJ T. LaVea, Nick Williams, Teron Ward.
And
Deji Olatoye. Go
and
ahead.
you'll get guys like Ronald Powell out of it, like
Yeah.
or like Morgan Fox or like Eric Wilson. Like you're not going to get anybody who's great. You'll get like these schmucks that are they're just dudes. Like they're just the guys. Like you might get like Mark Herzlich out of it if you really want him.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. So, yeah, other guys I'm looking at like Joe Villano, Josh Keys, Deji Olatoye, maybe a King, Bleedy Ray. Some of those guys would also be on that list. But yeah, you're not making an upgrade. You're not going to be getting draft value. Probably none of those guys would even go for a conditional seventh. If you wanted a conditional pick, you'd have to trade somebody who has a little bit more of a chance to make a team's roster, not necessarily a guy that's going to be trading a fringe guy for a fringe guy. Okay, next couple of all the next couple of questions come from Abraham Luez at Luez Abraham on Twitter. He asks, "Where is Anthony Dable at?"
Can I just say I don't really know? I mean, he's a French dude who's like 26 in his first Falcons camp.
Yeah. This is his second NFL camp. He was with the Giants last year. He's big. Like I'll give it to him. The Giants there's a pipeline of big Giants receivers that come to Atlanta. Like we had Corey Washington, was it last year or whatever, and now we got Anthony Dable. He's big. If he makes a couple of catches, I know how Falcon fans love their 6'3" wide receivers. We loved us some Amsterdam. We loved us some Brandon Harvey. So if he could wind up showing up in the preseason if he catches a couple of jump balls or whatnot. Other than that, I think he's probably a long shot to make the team. But he's got size, he's got athleticism that if he can make a couple of plays in the preseason, he's got a shot at the practice squad. All right. Next question from Abraham is: I had a dream where The Simpsons. That's weird. Showed Austin Hooper breaking out in 2017 for 750 yards. Should I believe the prediction?
I don't even want to answer this. Like you know how your teachers growing up always said, there are no stupid questions, just stupid people who don't ask questions. And then you're sitting here like, no, there's stupid questions. Yeah, like I'm gonna go with, do I believe he can get 750 yards? Yes. Do I think it's gonna be this year? No. Do I think this question is just weird? By far, yes.
Yeah, I mean, look, 750 is possible. I wouldn't expect it. I think the issue that Hooper is going to have this year is I think there's going to be certain matchups that he's going to feast on and he'll look amazing, and then there's going to be certain matchups where he won't feast on. It's hard to sort of sit here today and say, okay, this is the game you got to watch out for, because I don't know how much progress he's made yet. I don't know how much progress some of these defenses have made in terms of making adjustments in the Falcons. We'll find out when we get to the season. I think Hooper's going to be a solid piece for the Falcons. I don't expect him to put up monster production this year, just because I think he's going to be competing for balls. And as long as Julio Jones and Taylor Gabriel, Mohamed Sanu, and Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman are healthy and playing, it's going to be probably a little bit of a ceiling on how big his production can be. It's not to sit here and say that he won't have a couple of big games, but you think about Jacob Tamme the last couple of years, like probably in terms of big games that Jacob Tamme had over the last, over 19 games he played in Atlanta, was like 5, maybe 6. Other than that, like I don't really expect Hooper to have more than that this year. So, obviously it'll be a positive thing, but whether that adds up to him being going over 750, we'll see. But I wouldn't necessarily bet on it. Okay. Abraham asks, what should we expect from the D-line this year? And can it be any worse than last year?
I thought the D-line was pretty good last year. And I think it's only going to get better, especially when you have guys like Dontari Poe in the middle. And you've got guys like Grady Jarrett getting into his third season. And Beasley getting into his third season. And you've got Reed, who looks like he's finally 100%. So I think the Falcons are going to have a really good defensive line this year. I'm not going to go crazy and be like, this is the best possible defensive line they could have, but I think they'll have a good one, and I think they'll be towards the top in the league in terms of the overall defense because of how good the line's going to be. And because they've basically fixed all the other spots before they invested super heavy into the line this offseason.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think the D-line will be good. I hope it's going to be good. It's been such a long time since we had a good D-line in Atlanta that it'll be nice. If 2017 is my final year on Earth, I would like to see it one last time. Hopefully it's not my last year on Earth. Sorry, I got dark there for a second. But yeah, look, I think the D-line made big strides last year. Not to the degree that I wanted, but I'm always wanting more than what the Falcons are willing to give me. I think Poe. I think Poe will be a big addition. I think Beasley's going to be a better player this year than he was last year, even if the sack production isn't there. I think Takk will help. I don't know if he's going to have this monster rookie season that some people think he will, but I think he'll certainly be a contributor to the team. I think Brooks Reed showed in the second half of last season that he certainly can step up when asked to do things. We know Claiborne can play at a high level. I think Grady Jarrett's on the same level as Vic Beasley and sort of could really take a big leap this year in terms of his ability to be that disruptor in the middle that he was at times last year, but wasn't consistently week in and week out. I think Hageman showed strides at the end of the last season. I think Upshaw showed strides at the end of last season. I think Crawford's going to be able to contribute as well. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody that's also going to be the Shelby. I think, I think he'll be coming back from his Achilles and he'll be fine. I don't necessarily think he'll light the world on fire, but he wasn't really lighting the world on fire when he was healthy. So, he'll definitely contribute to the rotation. So I think the D-line will be good. Whether it's going to be this dominant sort of, on the par with, say, like Minnesota or Houston or a team like that, I don't, I'm very skeptical of that. But I do think if you can get Poe, you can get Beasley, you can get Jarrett, and you can get Claiborne all playing at their sort of peak levels, you're definitely approaching that. You're getting close to it. You're in the conversation for one of the top 10 D lines in the league. And if that happens, then this defense is going to be really, really good. Because we know the secondary is good. We know the linebackers will run around and make plays. And it's more about the D line dominating the line of scrimmage for them more so than I think anything that they're going to do on their own. So if the D line can dominate the line of scrimmage, then they'll definitely be freed up to run around and make plays and hit people. And you'll be seeing this defense playing fast and physical. Keanu O'Neal forcing like 12 fumbles or something like that. And it'll be a fun team to watch. All right. Abraham's next question is, when should the Falcons start looking into another wide receiver in the first round? Looking back, Julio was drafted in Roddy White's 7th season, and it worked out well.
Oh, when's Julio's 7th season? This year?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I think it all depends on what Taylor Gabriel does. Because if Taylor Gabriel can continue playing like he did most of last year, I think they might have that second wide receiver. And I think looking for a wide receiver in the first round wouldn't make sense. Just re-sign Gabriel and take another guy in like the 3rd or the 4th, or I don't know, actually play Hardy.
I would definitely be in favor of that. I like this question, Abraham, because it's more of sort of a hypothetical, and we're in the time of hypotheticals because nothing is happening. But Yeah, I think if you assume that Taylor Gabriel gets re-signed, and I wouldn't say that's a safe assumption, but I think it's more likely than not that he gets he becomes one of the higher paid number threes in the league after this offseason. I think the issue you're going to have to deal with is in 2018. That's going to be Justin Hardy's contract year, and that's probably going to be, I would assume, maybe I'm a little biased, but I would assume that's probably going to be Sanu's last season, because at that point you need to make a decision on whether you want to keep Justin Hardy. And to me, him and Sanu are basically the same player in terms of what their fit is. We'll see if that changes over the next 2 years in terms of what they produce. But I think at that point it makes a lot of sense to go with probably a cheaper player, because I don't think Justin Hardy's going to be, a $32 million wide receiver. So you could probably get like 92% of Sanu's ability for like 25 or 50% the price tag. So I think that's a smarter investment. But I think that the following offseason is probably that first year where you would be tempted to use a number one pick on a wide receiver, because the issue with Julio Jones is going to be, if he continues to have these nagging injuries, the issue he's going to deal with is going to be harder for him to recover from those injuries. And it's not necessarily that, Julio is going to like fall off of a cliff, but like there's evidence to suggest that, number one wide receivers like him tend to sort of hit the end of their plateau, their peak plateau around age 29. And it's not like they fall off of a cliff, but they just start to slowly trend downward. And given Julio's propensity to get injured, and because it's going to be harder for him to recover from those injuries, which we saw from Roddy White starting in 2014, and one of the reasons why he sort of fizzled out probably a little faster than people were expecting. I think if you're thinking about the Falcons using a number one pick on a wide receiver, it's probably that 2019 draft, because then you're looking at, getting somebody that you can sort of stash to sort of develop behind Julio for a year or two. And then, by then I think Julio will be 31, by 2020, he'll be like 31 or something like that. 32, which is about the age where Roddy started to really sort of slow down. And so, yeah, I mean, like, the Julio longevity, I hope Julio plays has another like 5 or 6 great seasons. But it is a minor concern given how often he gets hurt. And, it hasn't been an issue now because he's still young and his body is still in great shape. But, these injuries that he's had over the years, where we sit here on this show and we're like, maybe the Falcons should think about sitting him. I think we're going to have more of those conversations over the next 2 or 3 years. And that's going to be a bigger issue as we move forward. Hopefully obviously I don't want that to happen, but I think that's something that people will have to keep an eye on, 2-3 years down the road. And so if you're, making futures bets on when the Falcons will put another big investment in the wide receiver position, I would assume would be 2019 at the earliest, maybe 2020.
Yeah, I have to agree.
All right, last question from Abraham Luez is, when is the fantasy draft? That's referring to the Falcons PFC League. Will I get a notification in the ESPN app and don't want to miss drafting? I don't want to draft Trubisky in round 1.
I believe that I set the fantasy drafts for September 3rd, which is the Sunday after final cuts.
Okay.
You're either going to be in a 5 p.m. or a 7 p.m. league. Just check the league. It's all set up. I made it easy. I figured September 3rd is good. All final cuts are in. You'll know exactly who you can draft, exactly who makes sense. Some guys might end up getting signed on that day as opposed to cut. But for the most part, I think you're going to see what is already on each roster, and that's why I set it for that day.
All right. Well, there you go, Abraham. And for the other 5 of you in the fantasy league that are watching right now, you have your heads up. So you have no excuse for missing it. And I say that I'll probably wind up missing it or something like that, and getting Trubisky in the round 3. All right,
Aaron,
so
we have 2 drafts back to back. You and me. There's no way we can miss both of them.
That's probably true. I will find a way. So, guys, that's our show this week. We hope you enjoyed it. The usual rigmarole at the end of the show. If you want to send in your mailbag questions, of course, use the show's Twitter handle is FalconsPFC. Use the hashtag FalconsMailbag. I am at FalcFans. Scott is at Karasik S. Be sure to check out all the updates on the show on ProFootballCentral.com. We have a Facebook page, Falcon Central Radio on Facebook. You can ask questions there. You can watch live. We'll probably be back live on Facebook as well, simulcast and whatnot. Give Scott a subscribe on YouTube. If you're watching us right now, that's what you're doing. Just go ahead and subscribe. Also subscribe to the Pro Football Central channel on YouTube. Give us a like, a thumbs up, all that type of stuff. You guys know what to do. We'll be back next week to talk probably more about Jalen Collins or something, and more training camp stuff. But, yeah, we'll be back next Tuesday, guys. So see you then.